Billionaire sees poor girl sleeping in front of the cemetery. What he sees next brings him to his knees. The photo of his ex-wife whom he kicked out of the house years before. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The bitter December wind cut through Elliot Blackwood's expensive wool coat as he strode down the empty sidewalk. At 42, he'd mastered the art of appearing impervious to cold, to emotion, to anything that might suggest weakness. The street lamps cast long shadows across his path, their light reflecting off the iron gates of Oakwood Cemetery to his right. It was nearly midnight. The board meeting had run later than expected, but Elliot hadn't minded. His penthouse apartment held nothing but pristine furniture and echoing silence. What was waiting for him there except another tumbler of whiskey and the financial reports he'd already memorized? A rustling sound from ahead caught his attention. Probably just trash blown by the wind, he thought. But something made him slow his steps. There against the cemetery fence, a pile of flattened cardboard boxes shifted slightly. Elliot approached cautiously. The cardboard moved again, and he glimpsed a small pink shoe poking out from beneath. "Hello?" he called, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet street. "Is someone there?" No response came, but the cardboard trembled slightly. Elliot crouched down, peering into the shadows. A pair of wide eyes stared back at him, a child's eyes, filled with fear and wariness. "Hey there," he said, softening his tone. "Are you okay?" Slowly, like a small animal emerging from hiding, a little girl's face appeared. She couldn't have been more than 5 years old, with tangled dark hair framing a smudged face. Despite the dirt and fear, there was something hauntingly familiar about her delicate features. "You shouldn't be out here alone," Elliot said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "It's freezing. Where are your parents?" The girl remained silent, watching him with those enormous eyes that seemed to evaluate his every movement. Finally, she spoke, her voice surprisingly clear. "It's not a real bed, but at least it keeps the cold away." The matter-of-fact statement, delivered without self-pity, struck Elliot like a physical blow. No child should know how to survive on the streets, let alone speak of it with such resigned acceptance. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Naomi," she answered, then added with peculiar emphasis, "That's what Mommy named me." "I'm Elliot. Where is your mom, Naomi?" Instead of answering, the girl shifted, and Elliot noticed she was clutching something to her chest, a photograph protected by a clear plastic sleeve, worn at the edges as if handled frequently. "May I see that?" he asked, pointing to the photo. Naomi hesitated, clutching it tighter before something in his expression made her relent. She held it out cautiously. The moment Elliot's fingers touched the plastic sleeve, a strange sensation washed over him. When he turned the photograph over and saw the image, his knees buckled. He actually fell to one knee on the cold pavement. The shock was so complete. The photograph showed a woman with honey blonde hair and laughing green eyes, a smile he would recognize anywhere, even 5 years after seeing it last. Vanessa, his ex-wife. "Where did you get this?" he managed to ask, his voice barely audible over the sudden rushing in his ears. Naomi tilted her head, confused by his reaction. "That's my mommy," she said simply. The world around Elliot seemed to freeze. He stared at the child's face, really, looked at it for the first time, and saw his own eyes staring back, the same distinctive Blackwood eyes that had marked his family for generations. "Your mommy," he repeated, unable to process what was happening. "Vanessa is your mother?" Naomi nodded. "She got sick. She said she was going to get medicine and told me to wait, but she never came back." Elliot's mind raced, calculating dates with mounting horror. The bitter argument 5 years ago. The divorce papers served 2 weeks later. Vanessa disappearing completely afterward. The truth crashed down on him with crushing weight. Vanessa had been pregnant when he threw her out. This child, this small, vulnerable girl living on the streets, was his daughter. A daughter he never knew existed. Elliot's sleek penthouse seemed foreign to him as he stepped through the door. Naomi's small hand clasped in his. He'd carried her most of the way, her thin body weighing almost nothing against his chest. Now she stood in his marble entryway, staring wide-eyed at surroundings that likely seemed as alien to her as her cardboard shelter had to him. "This is where you live?" she asked, her voice small in the vast space. "Yes," Elliot answered simply, suddenly seeing his home through her eyes. The minimalist furniture, the abstract art worth more than some houses, the pristine surfaces untouched by any evidence of life. It wasn't a place designed for children. It wasn't really designed for anyone to live in, he realized. "Are you hungry?" he asked, remembering that children needed to eat regularly, something he himself often forgot. Naomi nodded timidly. The refrigerator yielded little, some takeout containers, a bottle of champagne, expired milk. Elliot found bread and peanut, butter in a cabinet and made a sandwich, cutting it into triangles the way his mother had done for him long ago. Naomi ate carefully, taking small bites as if afraid the food might disappear. She sat perched on the edge of his Italian leather sofa, her dirty shoes dangling above the white rug. "You can eat as much as you want," Elliot said, noting how she rationed each bite. "There's plenty more." As she ate, he made calls. First to his executive assistant, Sophia, who answered despite the late hour. "I need you to cancel my morning meetings," he said without preamble, "and I need you to arrange for children's furniture to be delivered tomorrow. A bed, dresser, whatever else a 5-year-old girl would need." To her credit, Sophia asked no questions beyond the practical details, though he could hear the confusion in her voice. His second call was to a private investigator he'd used for corporate matters. "I need to find someone," he said. "It's urgent." By the time he finished his calls, Naomi had fallen asleep on the sofa, the photograph of Vanessa still clutched in her small hand. Elliot covered her with a cashmere throw, then stood watching. Her, a storm of emotions battling inside him. How had Vanessa ended up leaving their child alone? Where was she now? The Vanessa he'd known would never abandon her child unless something terrible had happened. And what about him? What kind of father threw his pregnant wife out into the cold after a heated argument? The shame of it, even unknowing, as he'd been threatened to choke him. In sleep, Naomi's resemblance to him was undeniable. The same straight nose, the same stubborn chin. How had he not seen it immediately? Elliot prepared the guest room as best he could, making a nest of pillows to keep her from rolling off the too-high bed. He carried her sleeping form and tucked her in, awkwardly removing only her shoes, unsure of the proper protocol. As he turned to leave, a small voice stopped him. "Where are you going?" He turned back to find Naomi's eyes open, watching him with that same wary look. "Just to my room," he said. "It's across the hall." "Will you be here when I wake up?" The question carried weight far beyond its simple words. It was the question of a child who had learned that people disappeared. "Yes," Elliot promised. "I'll be here." Satisfied, she closed her eyes again, the photo still gripped in her hand. Elliot barely slept that night. Near dawn, he was awakened by screams. He rushed to the guest room to find Naomi thrashing in the midst of a nightmare, crying out for her mother. He stood frozen in the doorway, unsure what to do. His own father had never comforted him through nightmares. Showing emotions wasn't the Blackwood way, but something inside him rebelled against that inheritance. Cautiously, he sat on the edge of the bed. "It's okay, Naomi," he said awkwardly. "You're safe." To his surprise, she immediately calmed, her breathing gradually steadying, as she drifted back to sleep. Elliot remained there until he was certain she wouldn't wake again, marveling at how such a small gesture could have such effect. The first week passed in a blur of activity. The guest room transformed into a space suitable for a young girl, its gray walls repainted a soft yellow. Elliot hired a nanny, Mrs. Peterson, a grandmotherly woman with kind eyes and firm boundaries. He rearranged his schedule to work from home as much as possible. Naomi remained somewhat reserved, as though afraid, to fully settle in. She kept the photo with her always, sleeping with it under her pillow. On the third night, when her screams again pierced the darkness, Elliot didn't hesitate. He went to her, sat beside her, and this time, tentatively, stroked her hair. "It's just a dream," he said softly. "You're safe here, Naomi. I promise." Her small hand found his in the darkness, holding on as she drifted back to sleep. And something shifted inside Elliot Blackwood, as though a locked room in his heart had suddenly been opened. He didn't move away this time, instead staying beside her until morning's first light, his hand still held in the trusting grip of the daughter he never knew he had. 23 days had passed since Elliot brought Naomi home. A careful routine was forming between them, like dancers still learning each other's steps. Initially, Elliot held all his meetings by video call from his home office, keeping an ear out for any sounds in the apartment despite Mrs. Peterson's presence. But he soon discovered something surprising about Naomi, her remarkable self-sufficiency. It wasn't that she didn't need supervision. She was still just 5 years old. But there was an independence about her that was unusual for her age, one that Elliot recognized as the result of everything she'd endured in her short life. One morning after ending a conference call, he stepped out of his office and found Naomi sitting in the middle of the living room surrounded by sheets of paper. She was drawing intently, her tongue poking out at the corner of her mouth, small fingers gripping a crayon with fierce concentration. "What are you drawing?" he asked, kneeling down to see. Naomi held up the paper proudly. It was a drawing of 2 stick figures, a little one obviously herself and a bigger one wearing what looked like a suit. "That's me and you, Elle," she said. It was the first time she'd shortened his name. Something warm blossomed in Elliot's chest, a sensation he couldn't name. "Elle," he repeated and didn't correct her. After that, it became routine. Every morning after his early calls, he found time to sit on the living room floor and draw with her. At first, just random scribbles, but soon he found himself making houses, trees, people, and animals to entertain his little companion. "You draw really well," she said one day, admiring the elephant he'd sketched. Elliot laughed. "Actually, I was awful in art class at school." Naomi frowned, confused. "What's art class?" And so, without realizing it, he began telling her about his childhood. Small stories, fragments of memory he didn't even know he still had. The Saturday art classes his parents had made him attend. The teacher, with a thick mustache who always smelled of paint. How his younger sister created the most beautiful paintings while he struggled to draw straight lines. He never mentioned Vanessa, and Naomi never asked about her mother during these sessions. It was as though they shared an unspoken agreement. These moments were just for them, a chance to build their own connection. Gradually, between drawings and casual conversation, the mornings became something Elliot looked forward to more than any business meeting. The evenings developed their own routine, too. Elliot noticed he was getting home earlier now, not out of obligation, but because he wanted to. Before, the penthouse was just a place to sleep. Now it felt lighter, though he couldn't explain why. He started bringing small gifts for Naomi. Not expensive things. He soon learned that extravagance made her uncomfortable. A book with colorful illustrations, a puzzle, a box of better quality, crayons than the previous ones. The puzzle became another ritual. After dinner, they spread the pieces on the coffee table and worked on it together. At first, these were simple 20 or 30-piece puzzles, but Elliot noticed Naomi quickly figured out the patterns, so he started bringing more complex ones. She proved to be exceptionally good at it. "How do you do it so fast?" he asked one evening after she found 3 matching pieces in a row. Naomi shrugged. "I just look for the colors that match." But it was more than that. It was an aptitude for patterns, for seeing what others didn't see. Elliot made a mental note to look for schools that nurtured that kind of intelligence when the time came. When the time came, as though he was already imagining her staying, as though he saw her as a permanent part of his life. One rainy Saturday, after they spent the morning working on a 500-piece puzzle, he found her gazing sadly out the window. "Want to do something different today?" he asked. Naomi turned around, hopeful. "Can we watch cartoons?" Elliot realized that despite buying plenty of toys, he had never actually turned on the TV for her. Not because he had strict rules, he'd simply never thought about it. Sure, he said, picking up the remote. What kind of cartoons do you like? She shrugged. I don't know. In the shelter, there was only one about a bunny. Elliot flipped through kids' channels, but nothing seemed to grab her attention. Then he had an idea. Wait here, he said. He went to his storage closet and opened a box he hadn't touched in years. Inside were old DVDs from his own childhood, which he'd kept for reasons he couldn't articulate. He returned with a dusty case and showed Naomi. This was my favorite cartoon when I was your age. Her eyes lit up as it started. It was old, with simpler animation by modern standards, but it had a charm that transcended time. A story about a family of bears who explored magical forests. The little bear looks like you, Naomi said suddenly, pointing at the screen. Elliot laughed. Why do you think that? He looks serious, but he's not bad. He just doesn't know how to smile properly. The observation, so straightforward, caught him off guard. Was that how she saw him? Someone who didn't know how to smile? That afternoon, they watched 3 episodes in a row. Elliot was surprised to find he remembered every detail, even lines of dialogue. Naomi snuggled up beside him on the couch, laughing at the right moments, asking questions he sometimes couldn't answer. Why doesn't the big bear have any friends? Why does the fox always lie? Will the bears find the magic mountain? Elliot answered as best he could, realizing he was unconsciously repeating explanations his own mother had once given him decades ago. After that day, the biggest change happened. That was when Elliot realized he wasn't just housing Naomi, he was building a new life with her. One night he came home late from a meeting. He had told Naomi he'd be home after her bedtime and asked Mrs. Peterson to stay until he arrived. But when he walked in, he found the nanny asleep in an armchair and Naomi sprawled on the couch, a storybook open on her chest. He quietly dismissed Mrs. Peterson and stood there, watching Naomi as she slept. She looked so small, so vulnerable. The thought that had haunted him for weeks returned. What if he hadn't found her that night? How much longer would she have survived on the streets? He picked up a light blanket and gently covered her. He was about to leave when he heard a sleepy, "Boyce, I like living here with you, Elle." He froze, not sure how to respond. When he turned around, he saw her eyes were closed again. She'd been talking in her sleep, or nearly so. Driven by an impulse he couldn't explain, Elliot sat on the floor beside the couch. He stayed there, watching Naomi's peaceful face, feeling something he had never felt before. It was in that moment, seeing her chest rise and fall in gentle breaths, that he understood the truth. The entire empire he had built, all the money he had accumulated, meant nothing compared to this. This child who had come into his life under impossible circumstances was worth more than any fortune. The following Sunday, Elliot decided they needed an outing. The weather was good, a rare sunny day after a week of rain. The park seemed like the obvious choice. "I've never been to a park before," Naomi said as he helped tie her shoes. Elliot felt that familiar twinge. Every new discovery about Naomi's limited childhood pained him in a new way. "Then you're going to love it," he promised. "There are swings, slides, and a pond with ducks." He dressed in casual clothes, jeans and a simple t-shirt, something he rarely wore. They walked there, her small hand firmly in his. Naomi was wide-eyed, pointing at dogs, balloon vendors, a street band. The park was full of families enjoying the good weather. Elliot felt a flicker of discomfort. Did they look like a real father and daughter? Or would people see only a man alone with a small child and ask questions? But his worries vanished when Naomi spotted the swings. She squeezed his hand and pointed, unable to contain her excitement. Elliot realized with surprise that he had never seen her this animated. The Naomi he knew was reserved, almost too serious for her age. Seeing her act like any other kid warmed his heart. "Of course we can go there," he said. He helped her onto the swing, showing her how to grip the chains. "Now I'm going to push you, and you'll fly, okay?" Naomi nodded, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. Elliot began pushing her gently, gradually increasing the height. Her laughter, loud, free, unguarded, was like music. Soon he was laughing too, a sound he barely recognized as his own. When was the last time he'd laughed like that? He couldn't remember. He pushed the swing higher, and Naomi's laughter turned to shrieks of joy. She was completely in the moment, trusting him to keep her safe. After the swing came the slide, the seesaw, the spinning merry-go-round. Elliot, who once found noisy kids in crowded parks annoying, found himself laughing out loud, chasing after her, enjoying every second. It was during one clumsy chase between the play structures that it happened. Naomi, looking behind her to see if he was following, didn't notice the small bump in the path. She tripped and fell, scraping her knee on the gravel. Elliot rushed to her, heart pounding. He picked her up from the ground, checking the knee that was already showing a red mark and some scratches. "Naomi, are you okay? Does it hurt a lot?" She blinked a few times, looking at the scrape. Her lower lip trembled slightly, but she took a deep breath and steadied herself. "It hurts a little, but you're here, so it's okay." Something cracked inside Elliot. The absolute trust in her eyes. The certainty that because he was there, everything would be fine. It was a bigger responsibility than anything he'd ever felt, and at the same time, more rewarding than any professional achievement. "Yes, I'm here," he said, voice thick with emotion. "And I always will be." It was a promise he hadn't planned to make, but it came naturally, and as he spoke, he realized he meant it. He cleaned the scrape with wet wipes he had in his pocket. Thankfully, Sophia had insisted, "Kids get dirty, boss, trust me." Then he bought Naomi an ice cream, and they sat on a bench watching the ducks on the pond. "Thanks for the best day ever, Elle," she said, ice cream dripping down her chin. He smiled, wiping her face with a napkin. "You're welcome, kiddo." Kiddo. The nickname came out spontaneously, and it stuck. As they headed home, Naomi walked with a slight limp she tried to hide. Elliot made another decision. He needed to find out what happened to Vanessa. The following Monday, after leaving Naomi at home with Mrs. Peterson, Elliot called Sophia into his office. "I need you to hire someone," he said, closing the door discreetly. "What kind of professional, Mr. Blackwood?" Sophia asked. Elliot hesitated only a moment. "A private investigator, the best you can find." Sophia showed no surprise. "May I ask what the focus of the investigation will be?" "My ex-wife, Vanessa Blackwood, missing for 5 years. I recently found out she has a daughter, the little girl who's been with me. I need to know what happened." She nodded, taking quick notes. "Any specific details that might help the search?" Elliot opened a drawer and took out a copy of the photo Naomi always carried. "I have reason to believe this photo is recent, maybe 2 years old at most. And from what the girl told me, they were living in precarious conditions, moving frequently. That means Vanessa is, or was, alive not long ago." "Exactly. And I want to know why she disappeared just days before Naomi ended up on the streets." Sophia studied the photo for a moment. "Understood. I'll hire someone right away." A week later, the investigator presented his first report. Vanessa had indeed lived in at least 6 different addresses over the past 3 years, always small apartments or rented rooms in modest neighborhoods. She used her real name in some places, false names in others. She worked temporary jobs, never staying more than a few months anywhere. Everything indicated she was running from something, or someone. The last known address was a rented room in an elderly woman's house about 10 blocks from where Elliot found Naomi. The landlady confirmed Vanessa had left one night, leaving the child behind, promising to return in a few hours. When she didn't come back, the woman had taken Naomi to a children's shelter. "And what about my ex-wife?" Elliot asked, feeling his heart clench. The investigator shook his head. "We still don't know. There's no record of a death, hospitalization, or arrest under her name. She simply vanished." "Do you think she abandoned her daughter?" "I can't say, but based on neighbors and the landlady's accounts, she was extremely devoted to the girl. Something must have happened." Elliot thanked him for the report and asked him to continue the investigation. Driving home that night, a new sense of hope accompanied him. There was no proof Vanessa was dead. She might be out there, needing help, just like Naomi had when he found her. When he arrived, he found Naomi in the living room, focused on a new puzzle. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. "Look, Elle, I did all the edges already. He smiled, admiring her progress. That's amazing, kiddo, you're really smart. He sat down next to her and began searching for pieces. As they worked in comfortable silence, Elliot reflected on the journey they had undertaken these past weeks. In the beginning, they were two strangers thrown together by impossible circumstances. Now there was something more. A bond growing day by day, strengthened by morning drawings, puzzle nights, weekend outings in the park. As he watched Naomi's small fingers fit the pieces with surprising precision, Elliot felt a certainty solidify in his heart. He would do anything to keep this girl safe, and he would find Vanessa no matter what it took. Because now he had something he'd lost a long time ago. A family. And as the hope of finding Vanessa revived, Elliot understood more and more the value of what he had already found. Trust. The trust of that child sitting next to him, who had learned to believe in him just as he was learning to believe in her. That, he realized, was the greatest treasure of all. Room 307 at St. Mercy Hospital looked like any other. Faded beige walls, thin curtains barely blocking the light, a wall clock ticking too loudly in the night's silence. The woman lying in the bed watched the shadows dancing on the ceiling, unable to sleep. "How are you feeling today, Anne?" Nurse Kim entered, carrying a tray of medications. She was always kind, with a smile that seemed genuine. The woman everyone called Anne liked her. The same, she answered simply. That was the truth. 3 months in the hospital and everything was still the same. The doctors said she had been found unconscious in the street, hit by a driver who fled the scene. No documents, no ID, no one looking for her. Worst of all, no memory. Dr. Phillips will be by later. He said he has good news about your physical therapy. Anne nodded without enthusiasm. Her body was healing well. The leg that had been broken in 2 places could now bear her weight. The deep cut on her forehead had become a thin scar, almost invisible beneath the bangs that had grown out. Her ribs no longer hurt when she breathed deeply. It was her mind that remained broken. A vast emptiness where an entire life should have been. "Anne isn't even my real name," she said quietly, more to herself than to the nurse. Kim paused, looking at her with compassion. "It's just temporary until we figure out who you are." But both knew the chances faded with each passing day. No photo on the missing persons posters. No match in the police database. No one searching for a woman of about 30 with brown hair and light eyes. To the outside world, she simply didn't exist. The only thing she had were the nightmares. Always. The same. Crossing a dark street, looking over her shoulder as if someone were following, then headlights appearing out of nowhere, blinding her. The sound of tires screeching on asphalt, and the scream, her own scream, before everything went black. Dr. Phillips said it was a fragmented memory of the accident, but Anne knew there was more to it. Because in the dream, before the headlights, she was always holding something, a piece of paper, an address, and she felt a sense of urgency, as though she was finally heading to meet someone important. Then, in the most intense dreams, came the worst part, a child's voice calling for her, shouting a word she couldn't understand, a voice that made her heart ache so much she woke up in tears, not knowing why. "I brought you something," Kim said, pulling her from those dark thoughts. From her uniform pocket, she took out a small blue notebook and some colored pens. "I thought it might help, you know, to write down anything that comes to mind. Or draw." Anne took the notebook, running her fingertips over the smooth cover. "Thank you," she said, genuinely grateful for the kindness. After the nurse left, Anne opened to a blank page. She stared at the empty paper, so much like the emptiness in her mind. Then, without thinking too much, she began to draw. Her hand moved almost of its own accord. Lines turned into shapes. Shapes formed a face. A small face with round cheeks and big eyes. A little girl. Anne gazed at the drawing, her heart racing. Who was this child? Why did her fingers know how to sketch this specific face when her mind recognized nothing? She quickly turned the page, unnerved by the intensity of her feelings. On the new page, she wrote a few words that often swirled in her mind, without knowing if they meant anything. Jack promise hide photo cardboard run. The last word made her tremble. Run. Was she running from someone to something? The afternoon passed slowly. Dr. Phillips visited, confirming she could start walking without crutches in about a week, and promised another session with the psychologist who specialized in trauma and memory loss. I still hope your memory returns spontaneously, he said, as he always did. Post-traumatic amnesia often resolves with time. But his eyes said otherwise. Anne had been in the hospital longer than normal. Soon, bureaucratic issues would arise. Who would pay for her treatment? Where would she go afterward? How would she live without identity, without a past, without anything? That night, the nightmare was different. It began the usual way. The dark street, the headlights, the impact. But then instead of the usual darkness, she saw herself in a small room, sitting on a narrow bed. In her arms, the little girl from the drawing slept peacefully. In the dream, Anne felt an immense love for that child, so big it barely fit in her chest. She also felt fear, a constant corrosive fear that made her check the window repeatedly, making sure it was locked. The scene changed. Now she was standing, looking at the same girl, but awake. She was holding the child's small face in her hands. You must always keep this with you. It's very important. If anything happens, show it to someone who can help. In the dream, Anne handed the child something, a photo. She woke up with a start, heart pounding in her chest, the words echoing in her mind. It wasn't just a dream, it was a memory. She was sure of it. I have a daughter, she whispered to the empty room. The revelation hit her like an avalanche. A daughter. A small child who depended on her. A child who might be alone somewhere wondering why her mother never returned. Oh my God. Anne covered her mouth, feeling sick. I abandoned her. No, it wasn't intentional. She was going to come back. The accident happened, and now she didn't even know her daughter's name nor where to find her. Panic gripped her, suffocating. She threw off the blankets and tried to stand up, even though she knew she had nowhere to go. Where would she search? How would she find a child whose face she only knew from dreams and drawings? The door opened and the night nurse rushed in, alerted by changes in the monitors. Anne, are you okay? My daughter, she managed between short, painful breaths. I have a daughter. The nurse helped her lie down again, trying to calm her. I'll call the doctor. All right, breathe deeply. When she was alone again, Anne grabbed the notebook from the bedside table and turned to the drawing she'd made. She stared at the girl's face as though sheer willpower could make her remember the child's name. Who are you? She whispered to the drawing. Where are you now? Silent tears rolled down her cheeks. Another fragment bubbled up through the fog in her mind. An address, incomplete but real, a place she had been heading to that night. Anne picked up a pen and wrote in the corner of the page, 82 Park Avenue. That was all. No apartment number. No other details. But it was a start. That night, as the mild sedative took effect and finally allowed her to sleep, Anne made a silent promise to the nameless girl in her dreams. She would remember. She would find her way back. Somehow she would find her daughter, and maybe in finding her she would also find herself. On the edge of consciousness and dream, another word drifted to her like a distant whisper. Naomi. She tried to cling to it, repeat it, but sleep was too strong. Thus the nameless woman went on dreaming of the little girl who might still be waiting for her somewhere. 2 months had passed since Naomi entered Elliot's life. The penthouse, once more like a model home than an actual place to live, was now alive. Colorful drawings on the fridge, toys neatly stored in boxes around the living room, a tiny pair of sneakers alongside his expensive Italian shoes at the entrance. Subtle changes that meant everything. Fall had arrived, bringing colder winds and golden leaves Naomi loved to collect during their park walks. Elliot had made it a routine. On Sundays they woke up early, had breakfast at a nearby bakery, then spent hours in the park regardless of the weather. Elle, look at this one. Naomi yelled, running toward him with a perfect red leaf. It's the biggest one ever. Elliot smiled, kneeling to examine her treasure. Wow, that's really special. Let's keep it in your book, okay? Naomi nodded, placing the leaf carefully into a small bag she carried for her collection. She had changed so much in the past weeks. Her eyes no longer held that constant fear. Her laughter came more easily, and most notably, she slept through the night without nightmares. In the first week, Elliot rushed to her room at least twice every night, awakened by her terrified screams. Now the nights were peaceful. As Mrs. Peterson, the nanny who looked after Naomi while he worked, would say, "That girl finally feels safe." Safety. It was something Elliot had never valued before. He'd always lived for risks, for achievements, for the next challenge. Now, creating a secure environment for Naomi had become his priority. When they returned home that Sunday afternoon, they found Mrs. Peterson in the kitchen preparing a roast. "Perfect timing," she smiled. "It'll be ready in 10 minutes. "Thank you for doing this on your day off," Elliot said. The older woman shrugged. "I like cooking for you both. Besides, this little one needs real food, not just the takeout you always order." Elliot couldn't argue. Before Naomi, he barely used the kitchen. Now, thanks to Mrs. Peterson, there were home-cooked meals almost every day. And Naomi, who used to eat little and slowly as if to make the food last, now had a healthy appetite. After they ate dinner, they headed to the living room. It was time for their favorite nighttime routine, Elliot reading stories while Naomi listened, snuggled in his lap. "Which one tonight, kiddo?" Naomi pulled a new book from the shelf. Elliot had begun bringing a different book every couple of days, quickly amassing an impressive children's library. "This one," she said, pointing to the colorful cover of a story about a girl who had a star for a friend. They settled on the large couch, Naomi curled up against him like a kitten, her hair smelling of strawberry shampoo. Elliot began reading, changing his voice for each character just the way she liked. As he read, his mind drifted to how much his life had changed. The long hours at the office, the business dinners that stretched into the wee hours, the sudden trips, those belonged to the past now. He came home by 6 p.m., no exceptions. During meetings, he kept his phone close in case Mrs. Peterson needed him. Even Sophia, his assistant, had noted the change. "I've never seen you decline a 9 p.m. video conference before," she said one morning. "That little girl is working miracles." And it was true. Naomi had transformed not just his apartment, but his priorities, his values, his own identity. The investigator kept looking for Vanessa, but leads were few. Elliot was beginning to accept he might never find out what really happened to his ex-wife. Yet he was determined to honor her memory by caring for Naomi as if she were his own daughter. She was his own daughter, he reminded himself, by blood if not by experience. And so the star shone brighter than ever. Lighting the way home, Elliot read the final line, closing the book. Naomi stayed quiet, thoughtful. "Do you think stars can help us find people?" she asked suddenly. The question made Elliot's heart tighten. "Which people, kiddo?" "Like Mommy." Elliot placed the book aside and adjusted Naomi in his lap to look into her eyes. "We're doing everything we can to find her, remember? I told you about that special man who's looking for her." Naomi nodded. "But what if he doesn't find her?" It was the first time in weeks she directly brought up her mother. Elliot chose his words carefully. "Then we'll keep being a family, you and me. And we'll keep loving your mom, even if we don't know where she is." Naomi mulled this over, her small fingers fiddling with the button on his shirt. Then all of a sudden she leaned forward, wrapping her arms around his neck in a tight hug. "I love you, El," she whispered, her words muffled against his shoulder. It was the first time she'd said it. Elliot felt his eyes sting. "I love you too, kiddo," he replied, his voice husky. "So much." They stayed like that for a long moment, wrapped in the comfortable silence of the night. When Naomi finally pulled away, there was a new serenity in her eyes, as though she'd made an important decision. "Mommy told me something," she said softly, as if sharing a secret. "She said that if something happened, I should hold on tight to the photo because the man in it had kind eyes. Elliot froze. Was the man in the photo himself, standing next to Vanessa in the image he had only glanced at briefly? She said that about me? He managed to ask, barely able to form words. Naomi nodded solemnly. She looked at the photo a lot. Sometimes she cried. She said one day she'd see you again. The words hit Elliot like lightning. Vanessa had kept his photo all those years. She told Naomi about him. She'd been planning to seek him out. In that instant, the invisible bridges, connecting past and present, loss and reunion, despair and hope seemed to materialize before his eyes. Vanessa had sent Naomi to him. Not intentionally, perhaps, but the universe had completed the plan she hadn't been able to finish. "Thank you for telling me," Elliot said, kissing the top of Naomi's head. Than sat on the bed in room 307, scribbling, in her blue notebook. In recent weeks it had become her anchor, the one place where she could try to organize the confused fragments surfacing in her mind. The pages were full of drawings, the girl's face, now more detailed, a house she didn't recognize but could sketch with precision, and more recently a man, tall, broad-shouldered with intense eyes, always the same man. Dr. Winters, her psychologist, took particular interest in these drawings. "Do you have any idea who he might be?" she asked during that morning's session. Anne shook her head. "I feel like I should know, but—" She hesitated. "Sometimes I wake up with a name on the tip of my tongue. Jack. That's it. Jack." "Jack," the doctor repeated, making notes. "And how do you feel when you think of that name?" It was hard to explain. A whirlwind of conflicting emotions. "Fear," she said finally. "Not of him, more like fear of facing him. Like I did something terrible." She paused, frowning. "But I also feel longing, a deep, painful longing." The night before, she'd had a clearer dream. She was in a bright living room decorated for Christmas. The man from her drawings was there, younger, laughing. She called him brother. They toasted, took photos. Then the scene changed. Yelling, accusations, harsh words. She stormed out, vowing never to return. "I think he's my brother," she told the psychologist. "And we had a big fight." Dr. Winters nodded encouragingly. "That's a big breakthrough, Anne. Your memory is coming back bit by bit." But it wasn't enough. She still didn't know her real name. She didn't know where to find her daughter, because now she was absolutely sure the girl in her drawings was her child. And if the man truly was her brother, why did she feel both afraid of him and desperate to see him? "There is something called emotional blocking," the doctor explained. "Sometimes when a memory is too painful, our brain blocks it out even if we begin to recover other memories." Anne thought of the feelings that hounded her. Constant vigilance, looking over her shoulder, fear of being found. She had been running from someone. Perhaps that was why, even before the accident, she'd been hiding some memories from herself. That afternoon, after physical therapy, Anne sat by her window, watching people come and go on the street below. Her body was almost fully recovered. Soon she would be discharged. And then where would a woman with no name, no documents, no past go? More importantly, how would she find her daughter? She closed her eyes, trying to force the memory. She had to remember, she had to. That's when the word popped up clear as day. Cole. Her eyes flew open, her heart racing. Cole? Her last name? Her last name, or maybe his. Her brother's. She grabbed the notebook and wrote Jack Cole. She stared at the name, feeling a strange familiarity. Yes, that was it. Jack Cole was her brother. And her own name must also be Cole. Vanessa, she whispered into the empty room. Vanessa Cole. The name fit perfectly, like a puzzle piece snapping into place in her fragmented mind. Vanessa. She was Vanessa. She turned, on the small TV in the room, flipping through channels frantically. She was looking for any news about a missing woman named Vanessa Cole, or about a businessman named Jack Cole, because somehow she knew Jack was short for Jackson. She found nothing. She shut the TV off, frustrated but also oddly relieved. If there was no news, Maybe no one was looking for her. Maybe that was safer. That night, after the nurses made their rounds, Vanessa, no longer Anne in her own mind, opened the last page of her notebook and began to write a letter. Jackson, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I'm not even sure I'll ever find you again. But writing helps organize the thoughts that are finally coming back. I remember our last meeting, the terrible things we said to each other. You were right about a lot of them. I was ruining my life. I got mixed up with dangerous people. I was lost. What you didn't know, what I didn't tell you, was that I was already pregnant that night. And it was for her, for Naomi, that I finally found the strength to change. But the past doesn't let go of us easily, does it? The people I knew, the debts I racked up, the mistakes I made, they all chased me for years. I lived on the run with my daughter, changing cities, changing names, always looking over my shoulder. I thought many times about coming to you. I even drove near your building once, but I couldn't bring myself to go up. How could I ask for forgiveness after so long? How could I show up with a niece you never knew existed? Now, after the accident, I don't even know where Naomi is. I feel like I've failed as a mother, as a sister, as a person. I'm so scared, Jackson. If you're reading this, if you've somehow found me, please help me find my daughter, your sister, Vanessa, even if you don't see me that way anymore. She folded the paper and tucked it under her pillow. There was no way to send it, of course, but writing it made her feel closer to her brother, and in some way, closer to herself. Across town, Elliot Blackwood parked in front of a small, simple building. It was the 5th homeless shelter he'd visited that week. Mr. Blackwood, I'm Martha Gomez, director of the Hope Center. A middle-aged woman greeted him at the entrance, extending her hand. Elliot noticed calluses on her fingers, hands that were used to hard work. Thank you for seeing me, he said. As I mentioned on the phone, I'm looking for any information about my ex-wife, Vanessa. Martha led him down a narrow corridor to a small office. We don't have many formal records, she explained, but I was intrigued when you mentioned her name. We did have a Vanessa here for a few weeks about 6 months ago. She had a little daughter. Elliot's heart pounded. Vanessa Blackwood? That would be her. Martha nodded. She didn't use a last name here, but yes, the description you gave matches. Brown, hair, light eyes, around 30. And the daughter, Naomi, I believe, was 5. The shelter's plain wall seemed to spin around Elliot. It was real. Vanessa had been alive, just a few miles away, only months earlier. Do you know where she went? After this, Martha shook her head. Unfortunately, no. One day they just didn't come back. It happens a lot around here. People come and go. She paused, recalling something. Wait. Vanessa left a few things behind. Nothing valuable, but we kept them for a few months in case she returned. Martha stood and walked to a storage cabinet in the corner of the office. After some rummaging, she pulled out a small cardboard box. Here. It's not much, but maybe it'll help. Elliot opened the box carefully. Inside were some personal items, a scarf, a small pocket mirror, some photographs including a copy of the one Naomi carried, a well-worn address book, and underneath it all, an envelope. May I? Elliot asked, indicating the envelope. Of course. They're her belongings, but if you really are her ex-husband. Elliot opened the envelope. Inside was a letter that had never been sent. His name was written at the top in handwriting he'd recognize anywhere. Elliot, I've tried writing this letter. So many times I've lost count. The words never seem right. How do I explain 5 years of silence? How do I ask forgiveness for the things I said, for disappearing like that? I have no excuses. You were right about many things that night. I was destroying my life. But what you didn't know, what I barely knew myself at the time, was that I was pregnant. Naomi was born 8 months after our fight. She's perfect, Elliot. Smart, strong, kind. She's the best thing I've ever done. Because of her, I managed to quit drugs and leave the people who pulled me down. But the problems I created before she was born didn't go away. The debts, the dangerous people I got involved with, they followed us. That's why we moved from city to city, why I used fake names. I'm tired of running, Elliot, of looking over my shoulder, of denying Naomi a stable home. I've been thinking of you a lot lately. Naomi has your look, you know, that stubborn determination. I show her the photo we took at our wedding. I tell her stories about her daddy, the smartest and bravest man I know. Tomorrow I'm going to do what I should have done years ago. I'm going to look for you. I have your address. I'm terrified, to be honest, afraid you hate me, afraid you'll see only my mistakes, that you won't give me a chance to show I've changed. But I have to try. For Naomi. For me. For us. If there's still room in your heart for your broken wife, please open the door when I knock. With love and hope, Vanessa. The date at the top of the letter was 2 days before Elliot found Naomi on the street. He closed, his eyes, tears sliding down his face. Vanessa had been on her way to see him after 5 years. She was finally coming back, and something happened on the way. Mr. Blackwood, are you all right? Martha's concerned voice brought him back. She was coming to see me, he choked out. On the day she disappeared. The shelter director placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. I'm so sorry. Elliot took a deep breath, wiping his face with the back of his hand. I have to find her. She might be. He couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't want to think the worst, not now when he held this letter, this proof that Vanessa had wanted to return to his life, that she had changed, that she loved him despite everything. Have you tried hospitals? Martha asked. If something happened on the way, Elliot nodded. My investigator checked all admissions under her name but found nothing. What about unidentified patients? Sadly, it's common for homeless people to be admitted with no ID. He hadn't considered that. How do I check? I can help, Martha offered. We partner with several hospitals in the area. Let me make some calls. Well, the most important gift you could give me. That night, as he put Naomi to bed, Elliot made a silent promise to his absent ex-wife. He would find Vanessa, no matter how long it took, and until then, he would care for her daughter like the precious treasure she was. Because now he too had kind eyes, eyes that finally saw what really mattered. Anne sat on the edge of her hospital bed, scribbling in her blue notebook. In recent weeks, it had become her anchor, the one place where she could try to organize the confused fragments surfacing in her mind. The pages were full of drawings, the girl's face, now more detailed, a house she didn't recognize but could sketch with precision, and more recently, a man, tall, broad-shouldered, with intense eyes, always the same man. Dr. Winters, her psychologist, took particular interest in these drawings. Do you have any idea who he might be? She asked during that morning's session. Anne shook her head. I feel like I should know, but... She hesitated. Sometimes I wake up with a name on the tip of my tongue. Jack. That's it. Jack. Jack, the doctor repeated, making notes. And how do you feel when you think of that name? It was hard to explain, a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Fear, she said finally. Not of him. More like fear of facing him, like I did something terrible. She paused, frowning. But I also feel longing. A deep, painful longing. The night before, she'd had a clearer dream. She was in a bright living room decorated for Christmas. The man from her drawings was there, younger, laughing. She called him brother. They toasted, took photos. Then the scene changed, yelling, accusations, harsh words. She stormed out, vowing never to return. I think he's my brother, she told the psychologist. And we had a big fight. Dr. Winters nodded encouragingly. That's a big breakthrough, Anne. Your memory is coming back bit by bit. But it wasn't enough. She still didn't know her real name. She didn't know where to find her daughter, because now she was absolutely sure the girl in her drawings was her child. And if the man truly was her brother, why did she feel both afraid of him and desperate to see him? There is something called emotional blocking, the doctor explained. Sometimes when a memory is too painful, our brain blocks it out, even if we begin to recover other memories. Anne thought of the feelings that hounded her. Constant vigilance, looking over her shoulder, fear of being found. She had been running from someone. Perhaps that was why, even before the accident, she'd been hiding some memories from herself. That afternoon, after physical therapy, Anne sat by her window, watching people come and go on the street below. Her body was almost fully recovered. Soon she would be discharged. And then where would a woman with no name, no documents, no past go? More importantly, how would she find her daughter? She closed her eyes, trying to force the memory. She had to remember. She had to. That's when the word popped up clear as day. Cole. Her eyes flew open, her heart racing. Cole. Her last name? Or maybe his, her brother's? She grabbed the notebook and wrote, Jack Cole. She stared at the name, feeling a strange familiarity. Yes, that was it. Jack Cole was her brother, and her own name must also be Cole. Vanessa, she whispered into the empty room. Vanessa Cole. The name fit perfectly, like a puzzle piece snapping into place in her fragmented mind. Vanessa turned on the small TV in her room, flipping through channels frantically, looking for any news about a missing woman named Vanessa Cole, or about a businessman named Jack Cole, because somehow she knew Jack was short for Jackson. Finding nothing, she shut the TV off, frustrated but also oddly relieved. If there was no news, maybe no one was looking for her. Maybe that was safer. That night, after the nurses made their rounds, Vanessa opened the last page of her notebook and began to write a letter. Jackson, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I'm not even sure I'll ever find you again, but writing helps organize the thoughts that are finally coming back. I remember our last meeting, the terrible things we said to each other. You were right about a lot of them. I was ruining my life. I got mixed up with dangerous people. I was lost. What you didn't know, what I didn't tell you, was that I was already pregnant that night. And it was for her, for Naomi, that I finally found the strength to change. But the past doesn't let go easily, does it? The people I knew, the debts I racked up, the mistakes I made, they all chased me for years. I lived on the run with my daughter, changing cities, changing names, always, looking over my shoulder. I thought many times about coming to you. I even drove near your building once. But I couldn't bring myself to go up. How could I ask for forgiveness after so long? How could I show up with a niece you never knew existed? Now after the accident, I don't even know where Naomi is. I've failed as a mother, as a sister, as a person. I'm so scared, Jackson. If you're reading this, if you've somehow found me, please help me find my daughter. Your sister. Even if you don't see me that way anymore, Vanessa. She folded the paper and tucked it under her pillow. There was no way to send it, of course, but writing it made her feel closer to her brother and in some way closer to herself. Across town, Elliot Blackwood parked in front of a small, simple building. It was the 5th homeless shelter he'd visited that week. Mr. Blackwood, I'm Martha Gomez, director of the Hope Center. A middle-aged woman greeted him at the entrance, extending her hand. Elliot noticed calluses on her fingers, hands that were used to hard work. Thank you for seeing me. As I mentioned on the phone, I'm looking for any information about my ex-wife, Vanessa. Martha led him down a narrow corridor to a small office. We don't have many formal records, but I was intrigued when you mentioned her name. We did have a Vanessa here for a few weeks about 6 months ago. She had a little daughter. Elliot's heart pounded. Vanessa Blackwood, right? Martha nodded. She didn't use a last name here, but yes, the description you gave matches. Brown, hair, light eyes, around 30. And the daughter, Naomi, I believe, was 5. The shelter's plain walls seemed to spin around Elliot. It was real. Vanessa had been alive just a few miles away only months earlier. Do you know where she went after this? Martha shook her head. Unfortunately, no. One day they just didn't come back. It happens a lot around here. People come and go. She paused, recalling something. Wait, Vanessa left a few things behind. Nothing valuable, but we kept them for a few months in case she returned. Martha stood and walked to a storage cabinet. After some rummaging, she pulled out a small cardboard box. Here. It's not much, but maybe it'll help. Elliot opened the box carefully. Inside were some personal items, a scarf, a small pocket, mirror, some photographs including a copy of the one Naomi carried, a well-worn address book, and underneath it all, an envelope. "May I?" Elliot asked, indicating the envelope. "Of course. They're her belongings, but if you really are her ex-husband." Elliot opened the envelope. Inside was a letter that had never been sent. His name was written at the top in handwriting he'd recognize anywhere. Elliot's hands trembled as he unfolded the letter. The handwriting was unmistakably Vanessa's, a mix of cursive and print he'd recognize anywhere. "Jack, I've tried writing this letter so many times I've lost count. The words never seem right. How do I explain 5 years of silence? How do I ask forgiveness for the things I said, for disappearing like that? I have no excuses. You were right about many things that night. I was destroying my life. But what you didn't know, what I barely knew myself at the time, was that I was pregnant. Naomi was born 8 months after our fight. She's perfect, Jack. Smart, strong, kind. She's the best thing I've ever done. Because of her, I managed to quit drugs and leave the people who pulled me down. But the problems I created before she was born didn't go away. The debts, the dangerous people I got involved with. They followed us. That's why we moved from city to city, why I used fake names. I'm tired of running, Jack, of looking over my shoulder, of denying Naomi a stable home. I've been thinking of you a lot lately. Naomi has your look, you know? That stubborn determination. I show her the photo we took our last Christmas together. I tell her stories about her father, Jack, the smartest and bravest man I know. Tomorrow I'm going to do what I should have done years ago. I'm going to look for you. I have your address. I'm terrified, to be honest. Afraid you hate me. Afraid you'll see only my mistakes, that you won't give me a chance to show I've changed. But I have to try. For Naomi. For me. For us. If there's still room in your heart for your problematic wife, please open the door when I knock. With love and hope. Vanessa. The date at the top of the letter was 2 days before Elliot found Naomi on the street. He closed, his eyes, tears sliding down his face. Vanessa had been on her way to see him after 5 years. She was finally coming back, and something happened on the way. "Mr. Blackwood, are you all right?" Martha's concerned voice brought him back. "She was coming to see me," he choked out. "On the day she disappeared, she was coming to see me." The shelter director placed a gentle hand on Elliot's shoulder. "I'm so sorry." Elliot took a deep breath, wiping his face with the back of his hand. "I have to find her. She might be—" He couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't want to think the worst. Not now, when he held this letter, this proof that Vanessa had wanted to return to his life, that she had changed, that she loved him despite everything. "Have you tried hospitals?" Martha asked. "If something happened on the way," Elliot nodded. "My investigator checked all admissions under her name but found nothing." "What about unidentified patients?" "Sadly, it's common for homeless people to be admitted with no ID. He hadn't considered that." "How do I check?" "I can help," Martha offered. "We partner with several hospitals in the area. Let me make some calls." For the next hour, Martha made a series of phone calls, describing Vanessa with all the details Elliot could provide. Most hospitals had no useful information. A few promised to look into it and call back. Then, on the second to last call, they got their first real lead. "Dr. Phillips, this is Martha from the Hope Center." "Yes, I'm well, thank you. I'm calling about a special case. We're looking for a woman around 30, brown hair, light eyes, possibly admitted without identification in the last 2 to 3 months." Elliot watched anxiously as Martha's expression changed. "Really? How long has she been there? Post-traumatic amnesia?" "I understand. Yes. I have someone here who might be a relative. Could we come by today?" Excellent, thank you so much. She hung up the phone, turning to Elliot with shining eyes. St. Mercy Hospital. They've had an unidentified patient there for more than 3 months, a woman in her early 30s, found after a hit and run. She has amnesia. Elliot felt the air leave the room. It could be her, he whispered. The doctor said we can go right now. She'll meet us in person. Elliot picked up the box of Vanessa's belongings, carefully placing the letter in the inside pocket of his jacket. For the first time in weeks, he felt he could breathe again. There was a chance to fix the past, a chance to reunite his wife with her daughter, a chance to have a whole family again. Let's go, he said, voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm him. Let's find her. St. Mercy Hospital had that unmistakable smell Elliot had always disliked. Disinfectant mixed with something indefinable that screamed illness. He followed Dr. Phillips down the white corridor, trying to contain the anxiety that made his heart pound. I should warn you, Mr. Blackwood, the doctor said as they walked, that even if it's your ex-wife, she may not recognize you right away. Post-traumatic amnesia can be unpredictable. Elliot only nodded, gripping the handle of the briefcase containing a copy of the photo Naomi carried and other documents that might prove Vanessa's identity. The letter in his jacket pocket felt like it was burning against his chest. Does she remember anything? He asked, voice more gravelly than he intended. Fragments, dreams. In recent weeks, she's been drawing a child's face and mentioning a name. Jack. That's when I began suspecting this might be emotional blocking rather than just physical trauma. They stopped outside room 307. Dr. Phillips turned to him with a serious expression. I'll go in first, prepare her. Wait here until I call you, okay? Elliot wanted to protest. He wanted to burst through the door, embrace Vanessa, tell her everything was going to be fine. But he merely agreed, leaning against the hallway wall, while the doctor went in. 5 minutes that felt like an eternity. Finally, the door opened again. You can come in now, Mr. Blackwood. Heart in his throat, Elliot stepped forward. Then, after 5 years of separation, of believing he'd lost her forever, and 3 months of frantic searching, he saw his ex-wife. Vanessa was sitting on the bed, wearing a simple hospital gown. She looked thinner than he remembered, her face a bit more angular with small lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. Her brown hair was shorter, brushing her shoulders. But those eyes, her beautiful hazel eyes, were unmistakable. She stared at him, confused. There was no immediate recognition in her gaze, just curiosity and maybe a hint of fear. Vanessa, was all he could say, his voice barely working. Something happened then, subtle, but noticeable. A tremor seemed to run through her body. Her eyes widened slightly and her breathing quickened. You know me, she said. It wasn't a question. Elliot took another step, still keeping a cautious distance so as not to scare her. Yes, I'm Elliot. Elliot Blackwood, your husband. Vanessa brought her hand to her mouth, her eyes suddenly filling with tears. She didn't understand why her body recognized something her mind hadn't yet grasped. She was standing before someone, important, someone who was part of her. I can't remember, she said, tears now streaming down her cheeks. Why am I crying? Why does it hurt so much to see you? Elliot felt his own eyes burning. He moved closer, still tentative. May I? He asked, indicating the edge of the bed. She nodded, wiping away tears with the backs of her hands. Dr. Phillips says you might be my husband, that you have proof. I do, he replied, opening the briefcase and pulling out the photo Naomi carried. The same picture found among Vanessa's belongings at the shelter. The two of them at Christmas just before everything fell apart. Vanessa took the photo gently, as if it was something precious and fragile. Her fingers brushed over his face, then her own in the picture, almost reverently. That's me, she murmured, not as a question but a statement. Her mind recognized the moment, those people. Christmas, 2019? At your apartment? Yes, Elliot confirmed, his heart accelerating. December 24th, 2019. The last time we were together. You were wearing that silver dress you loved. Vanessa lifted her gaze from the photo to meet his eyes. The earrings you gave me that morning. Pearl drops with tiny diamonds. Elliot nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. She remembered. Not everything, but something. I have something else to show you, he said gently. Something that might help your memory. Elliot pulled out his phone, opening a recent photo of Naomi smiling as she attempted to solve a puzzle that was too advanced for her age. Vanessa's reaction was immediate. She gasped, raising her hands to her mouth again, eyes locked on the screen. That girl, she whispered. She's the one in my dreams. My daughter. Our daughter. Naomi. In the days that followed, Elliot rearranged his entire life to spend as much time as possible at the hospital. He arrived early in the morning before breakfast and only went home at night after Naomi was already asleep under Mrs. Peterson's care. Vanessa didn't have a miraculous recovery of her memory. There was no sudden eureka moment. Instead, there were small steps forward, moments of clarity in the haze. Elliot brought photos, told her stories about their life together, about how they met in college, their whirlwind romance, the good years, before things went bad. Sometimes Vanessa just listened unmoved. Other times her eyes sparkled with recognition. There was a red umbrella, she said one day out of nowhere. You held it over both of us in that storm, and your shoulder got soaked. Elliot smiled, surprised and moved. Our second date. We got caught in the rain leaving the theater. One particularly good morning, nearly 2 weeks after their reunion, Elliot arrived at the hospital with news. The doctor said you can have another visitor today, he announced, trying to contain his excitement. Someone very special wants to see you. Vanessa, who now spent most of her time in a chair by the window rather than in bed, looked at him curiously. Who? It's a surprise, Elliot said, smiling. I just need to know if you're ready. If it's too much, we can wait. She thought for a moment, then nodded. I'm ready. An hour later, after a careful talk with Dr. Phillips, Elliot returned to the room holding Naomi's hand. The little girl was nervous, biting her lower lip, a gesture so much like Vanessa's that it pained him. When they entered the room, Vanessa was standing by the window. She turned at the sound of the door and froze at the sight of the child holding Elliot's hand. It was an electric moment. The air seemed to hum with a near-tangible energy. Naomi stared at her mother, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. Vanessa stared back, a raw, primal emotion taking over her face. Naomi, Vanessa whispered, the name coming out like a prayer. In that instant, Elliot knew it didn't matter how much of her conscious memory Vanessa had lost. Her heart, her body, her soul knew her daughter. Naomi looked at Elliot as if asking for permission. When he gave a slight nod, she let go of his hand and walked carefully toward Vanessa. She stopped a few steps away, suddenly shy. Hi, Mommy. Spring arrived in the city, bringing not just flowers and longer days, but a new life for the penthouse that had once seemed merely a stopover for Elliot. 3 months had passed since Vanessa's discharge, and the transformation was visible everywhere. Flour on kitchen counters, children's books by the couch, colorful drawings on the refrigerator. One sunny Sunday morning, while Elliot watched Vanessa and Naomi make pancakes together, he realized how profoundly his life had changed. The oppressive silence he'd never noticed before was replaced by laughter, singing, and the sounds of life. Later, in their new suburban home with its garden for Naomi to run in, the small family stood before 2 framed photographs on the wall, the worn photo Naomi had carried on the streets, and a new one of the 3 of them together smiling in the sunshine. The first one is us when we were lost, Naomi said with unexpected wisdom. The second one is us when we were found.